So we produce on each assembly line about 1,000 bikes a day, but that correlates into a bike every 30 seconds.
Here in Seymour, Indiana, Guardian Bikes operates a 540,000 square foot plant that manufactures high-end bicycles for kids. The company is pulling off a unique feat. Starting in 2022, it began shifting its manufacturing out of China.
It wasn't easy. It took a lot of risk taking, and it took a lot of kind of blazing a trail, and it even took kind of getting into losing money.
Guardian's story reflects the broader difficulties that companies face in moving manufacturing back to the US. Between 1997 and 2023, the number of US manufacturing firms and plants dropped by 25% as global trade barriers fell. In the late 1970s, nearly 20 million Americans were employed in manufacturing jobs, accounting for more than 20% of total employment. Today, that number is just 12.7 million. President Trump has pushed to revitalize manufacturing.
America will be a manufacturing nation once again.
Companies like Apple, IBM, and Johnson & Johnson have also pledged to invest billions in the coming years. But economists and trade experts are divided on whether a manufacturing renaissance is possible or if it even makes sense.
There are many obstacles to moving work back to the United States.
Think about how much a pair of sneakers would cost if they were made here in the United States. It would be a lot more expensive. So we should all welcome the fact that goods are being produced in the most efficient ways possible, because that lowers prices for us and allows us to raise our standard of living.
To look at the challenges and possibilities of bringing manufacturing back to the US, CNBC visited Guardian Bike's Midwest facility. Guardian Bikes got its start in 2013, making safety brakes for bicycles. A few years later, the company pivoted to making the entire bike.
And then eventually decided we could do a lot more.
At the time, bicycle production had largely shifted outside of the US.
Let's say you go all the way back to World War II era. Pretty much every bike sold in the United States was made in the United States. And then by the time you get to 70s, 80s, 90s, it all evaporated.
At first, the company imported its bikes from a Chinese OEM, a manufacturer that makes products for another company based on specifications it provides.
These OEMs go out and order wheels and tires and handlebars and grips, and you kind of work with them to create a spec on what you'd like in a bike.
So a bike in a box is what we call it. Came on a container, floated across the ocean, came into the West Coast, and then was distributed through a distribution model in the US.
As the brand grew, Riley wanted greater control over quality. Manufacturing onshore would give them a better visibility over the final product, as well as lowering shipping and inventory costs.
Your lead time is like 6 to 8 months to get bikes, which oftentimes is the case when you're making them in China or overseas. So you're always sea shipping it across the ocean. That makes it really hard to stay in stock of the right colors and the right sizes and the right SKUs that people want.
When we're ordering stuff from China, we have to build up massive amounts of inventory here in the US to protect the business. But when all the materials come from the US, we can build the bikes essentially just in time.
In 2022, the company opened its Midwest facility. Today, the company says its annual revenue is over $100 million, and it produces about 12,000 bikes per week.
We weld a bike in about 3 minutes in a full cycle, and most of our component level parts are cut between 5 to 9 seconds. So this one here has shot 442,000 hubs since we've had it over the last 2 years.
But pulling off Made in America is not without its challenges. The biggest problem? Finding parts outside of China.
The supply chain for a lot of the parts doesn't exist in the United States anymore. You have to talk to companies that might be making a totally different part and try to convince them to make some of the parts that you're doing domestically.
Now, Riley says that new tariffs are starting to change that dynamic.
With kind of the most recent tariff environment, now we're starting to get either cost parity or in some cases the domestic parts are cheaper than what you can get out of China.
Guardian Bikes has also been able to combat the advantages of offshoring, like labor costs, by creating a highly automated production process.
We have to automate, and it has to be fast, and it has to be very, very specific so that we can make turns and have high volume production here with less people.
But bike making still requires an element of human labor, and finding skilled workers is something that many US companies have struggled with. Guardian was able to find workers who were laid off from their jobs at nearby auto plants, and the proximity to other manufacturers helped them source parts locally.
Our chain guard is made at a company just down the street. Our tubes purchased in Columbus, Indiana, so a local supplier just 45 minutes north of us.
By the end of 2025, the company thinks that 70% of the bike's components will be made in the US. By 2026, it says that number could reach 100%. To understand the challenge of onshoring, let's take a look at what it takes to make a bike. There's chains, handlebars, tires, reflectors, rims, grips, and a steel frame. All of these components, called inputs, require specialized machinery and parts to create them, and these are supported by a bigger network of industries. When a factory opens, input suppliers tend to open up near the factory, creating a local supply chain. Because of this, it's not always easy or even possible in some cases to move every component to the US.
There are many obstacles to moving work back to the United States. One is that, the inputs that I use all come from overseas. And so how do I get access to those for the time being if they don't exist in the United States? There's also, in some industries, the sad fact that we're almost starting from scratch.
Why is it so difficult or so expensive to manufacture those same toys here in the United States? You said you think it's impossible.
Well, I've looked on and off for 10 years because at various times there have been incentives to produce products in the US, and we've tried to even create a range we could make here. The reality is that nobody wants to produce products at our volume. The labor costs in this country are also very high, and labor's not really available, so we're just kind of boxed out.
So why did factories leave in the first place? As trade barriers lowered in the late 20th century, US companies began moving manufacturing operations overseas, or not opening them at all. Instead, ordering components from OEMs in countries like China, Mexico, Vietnam, and Thailand. It started with globalization in the 80s, the North America Free Trade Agreement in the 90s, and then China joined the World Trade Organization in 2001. Cheaper labor abroad meant lower prices and closed factories here. China has since emerged as a dominant player, first in textiles and now in consumer electronics.
And that's for a couple of reasons. Number one is just the size of China's manufacturing base. It dwarfs everybody else in the world, and so just size makes a difference.
And then there's cost. The average wage for a manufacturing worker in the US is around $35 per hour. In China, that rate is around $4 per hour. In Vietnam, it's even lower, at $1.30 per hour. China has also spent billions more than any other country to train its workers and build high-tech factories.
China is an extraordinary manufacturing capability, and they are doubling the number of chips that they're building every single year.
The most recent data available from 2019 estimates that China's spending on industrial policy that year was around $248 billion. That's compared to $84 billion by the US, 0.39% of its GDP. China's tax benefits for research and development also rose by an average annual rate of 28.8% between 2018 and 2022. The US doesn't prop up its manufacturing base in the same way, but it does provide some support for domestic production. The 2022 CHIPS Act, for example, allocated around $39 billion in federal subsidies and grant support for semiconductor fabrication plants. But those efforts are narrowly focused on one industry, for national security purposes.
The Biden effort was more premised on the idea that there are particular manufacturing activities that, for national security reasons, such as with chips, should be done here in the United States.
In the US, manufacturers also face concerns around environmental impact.
Even if we're able to bring more manufacturing back to the States, our environmental laws are there for a reason, and it's to prevent what we saw at the turn of the 20th century with cities that were cloaked in smog, with rivers that caught on fire, with toxics leaking into our water supplies.
Today, manufacturing hubs in China and Vietnam don't impose the same environmental standards on companies as the US does.
Working conditions are poorer and labor costs are a lot lower in China. Same goes for environmental and pollution controls, where those are very lax in China with lower standards. And so the environmental costs that those firms have are far less than what you would see in the United States of America.
All of these factors making it challenging for manufacturers in the US to be cost competitive without government support. Earlier this year, solar panel maker Meyer Burger closed an Arizona plant, citing an inability to compete with lower-priced products made in Asia. Its story is one of thousands over the years.
Every nation obviously has a right to try to boost its economy, but there are guardrails that have been put into place so that some of those efforts don't come at the expense of other countries. Unfortunately, China has taken all of those guardrails off, and unfortunately, that's come at our expense. It hasn't been a win-win in the global economy.
As conditions for manufacturing have become more favorable overseas, the U.S. has shifted from a goods economy to a services one. Today, service jobs account for over 80% of non-farm employment in the U.S. President Trump has claimed that new factories will bring more jobs to the U.S., but economists are divided over whether a manufacturing renaissance makes sense.
I don't see the tariffs bringing manufacturing back to the United States, because what the president is talking about, I assume, are manufacturing jobs, not just manufacturing factories. We're talking about jobs. The problem is that most of those jobs were lost not because of trade, they were lost because of automation.
And some manufacturers are facing challenges finding workers, let alone skilled workers. Currently, there are over 400,000 open manufacturing positions in the U.S.
So I don't see a lot of evidence that Americans are clamoring for these jobs, which makes sense because your average manufacturing job doesn't pay as well as your average service sector job.
President Trump has touted tariffs as a mean to boost goods production beyond tech. But the debate is ongoing on whether tariffs can turn back time.
You can probably find individual examples of tariffs being a success for particular businesses that you block out foreign competitors so they get to expand production, raise their prices, and it's a win for them. But overall, in the context of the broader U.S. economy, I think it's clearly a net negative.
But others argue that tariffs could bring back American jobs in some industries and revitalize factories closed due to offshoring.
A responsible and strategic use of tariffs is important for the success of manufacturing policy and bringing some jobs back to America. Tariffs alone will not do it, but our companies are not operating in a vacuum.
As for Guardian Bikes, it says it's not waiting on policy and is continuing to bet that made in the U.S. is not only possible, but advantageous. Today, its Seymour facility employs 250 workers, with plans to hire more as it scales up production.
Even if it's not necessarily cheaper right away to make something in the United States, we think it ends up being a competitive advantage for us to do it. And we find that those competitive advantages often outweigh a little bit of a cost increase. It's exciting to prove that it's possible and to do something that hasn't been done here in so many decades